Good morning, children. Hope you're all fit and fine. So, before starting our chapter, let's revise what all we have studied in our previous chapters. Yes, I said chapters because chapter 18, 19, and 20 are connected to each other. So, now let's revise. So, till now we have studied that British came to India as a trader. So, earlier their main concern was only trading. But the Indians were not united, and due to the constant fighting between different kingdoms in India, the British started taking control over India. So, because of the constant fighting between the kingdoms in India, the British took this advantage and they started taking control over India. So, this was the big advantage for the British. So, the British started taking control of India and also started making unjust laws for the Indians and used unfair means to get rich at the cost of the Indians. And these unjust laws made the Indians angry and dissatisfied with the British rulers. And this dissatisfaction with the British rulers gave rise to the revolt of 1857, and it is also called the First War of Independence. But the revolt was crushed by the British. This all we have studied in our previous chapters. But after this revolt, Indians realized the injustice of the British rule and they also realized the value of freedom. So this all we have studied in our previous chapter 18. And the name of the chapter was The British Raj and the First War of Independence. And then we have studied in chapter 19 that the social reformers fought against the social evils that divided the Indian society and made it backward. And also we have studied that the British tried to divide Indians on the basis of religion because they wanted to weaken the feeling of nationalism among Indians. And because the feeling of nationalism was strong in Bengal, so they divided Bengal into two parts, one for the Hindus and other for the Muslims. But the Indians protested strongly against the division of Bengal. The British tried to ruthlessly put down the movement, but the opposition to the partition of Bengal was successful and the British were forced to reunite Bengal. And then we have studied that in 1914 World War first started and many Indian soldiers fought with the British army and they thought that British would be kind or soft with them because thousands of Indian soldiers were killed. But this did not happen. The British became more harsher towards Indians. And then we have seen that Gandhiji returns to India from South Africa in 1915. And in 1915, World War First was still going on. So now Gandhiji took over the leadership of the independence movement going on in India. So now today we will learn how Gandhiji led the movement and how Gandhiji worked to remove evil practices from Indian society and to unite Indians against the British. And then we'll see how Gandhiji launched different movements with non-violent methods. And then we'll see how India got independence. So let's see next. So this is our chapter 20, and the name of this chapter is Gandhiji Leads the Nation. So first let's see what all we are going to study today. So we'll learn Gandhiji's contribution to the freedom struggle, then the Rowlatt Act and the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, the non-cooperation movement and the civil disobedience movement. So these were the movements started by Gandhiji. Then we'll see the Simon Commission and the demand for Purna Swaraj. So Purna Swaraj means complete independence. Then we'll see World War II and the Quit India movement. After that, Subhash Chandra Bose and the Indian National Army. So we'll see how Subhash Chandra Bose formed the Indian National Army. Then we'll see how India finally became free. So this all we are going to learn today. So now let's start our chapter. So as we have studied that Gandhiji returned to India from South Africa in 1915. So after returning to India in 1915, Gandhiji travelled to various parts of the country. But why he travelled to various parts of the country? Because he wanted to know more about the people. But he was shocked by what he saw. So what did he saw? So when Gandhiji travelled to various parts of a country, so he saw that most people were very poor and social evils like the caste system kept the people divided and backward. Like in a previous chapter we have studied that the social reformers wanted to remove these social ills by educating the people. So Gandhiji was very sad. So why Gandhiji was very sad? Because the people of low caste were considered untouchables and were treated very badly. So who were the untouchables and what is the meaning of untouchables? So untouchables means that they cannot be touched. So Gandhiji realized that to unify the people of India, the social evils had to be removed. So then he started working towards this aim, and he also called the untouchables Harijans, and Harijans means people of God. So Gandhiji gave the name to the untouchables Harijans, and Harijans means people of God. And by doing this, Gandhiji quickly won the support and respect of the common people of India. So let's see next now. So this picture is also given in your book, and let's read out the information related to this picture. So people gathered on the banks of the Sabarmati river to hear Gandhiji speak. Gandhiji was loved by the masses. So Gandhiji was loved by the common people, and that is why on the banks of the river Sabarmati so many people gathered. So now let's see next, children. So this is our next topic, the Rowlatt Acts and the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. You have studied that after World War first ended, the British became harsher towards Indians. So this we have already studied. And also you know that British imposed fresh taxes and passed new laws, and this was the time when Gandhiji launched his Satyagraha movement in India. So Satyagraha, as you know, it is a non-violent method of protest against any form of injustice. And we all know that Gandhiji always used non-violent method of protest. And in 1919, the British passed new laws called the Rowlatt Acts. And what was these laws which British made? So under these laws, British could arrest anyone without a trial. So trial means the process in a court of law where a judge etc. listens to evidence and decides if somebody is guilty of a crime or not. So the British started these laws in which they could arrest anyone without a trial. So now you already know what is trial. So without a trial, the British could arrest anyone. So Gandhiji asked the people to oppose the laws. So for this, demonstrations and meetings were held all over the country. So now here demonstration means pradarshan in Hindi. So Gandhiji asked the people to oppose the laws, and for this demonstrations and meetings were held all over the country. And now Gandhiji's Satyagraha movement had millions of followers. On 13 April 1919, a public meeting was held in Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar, and it was attended by about 10,000 men, women and children. So these many people were attending the meeting. When they were attending the meeting, so there the British soldiers entered the Jallianwala Bagh, and on the orders of General Dyer, the British soldiers blocked the only exit from the park and fired for 10 minutes into the unarmed crowd. So what happened after that? So after that, thousands were killed or injured. So this is what happened in Jallianwala Bagh. It was very painful incidents for everyone. This incident shocked the entire country and also some British. So it was so much painful that it shocked the British also. Earlier we have studied that British was rough with the Indians, but this incident shocked them also. So here you can see how the British soldiers fired on the unarmed crowd. Dyer was forced to resign in March 1920. So here you can see he is General Dyer. So this incident took place in 1919, and in 1920 General Dyer was forced to resign. In July 1920, however, the House of Lords in Britain forgave Dyer. So House of Lords in Britain means upper house of the British Parliament. So the upper house of the British Parliament forgiven Dyer. So now let's see next, children. So this is our next topic, the non-cooperation movement. So after shootings, an attitude of the British government convinced Gandhiji and the people of India that India must become independent. And for this, Gandhiji now launched the non-cooperation movement. And Gandhiji also asked the people of India not to cooperate with the British. Indians working for the British government resigned. So those Indians who were working for the British, they resigned. Lawyers boycotted the courts, and Indian children were withdrawn from British government schools. So all this happened in the non-cooperation movement. And also throughout the country, men, women and children sat on the streets and blocked them. And men, women and children refused to rise or get up even when beaten by the police. So now let's see next, children. So this picture is also given in your book. So here you can see peaceful protester being beaten up by British troops during the non-cooperation movement. So here you can see how the British were beating the Indians because they sat on the streets and blocked them. And when the British saw that Indians were refused to rise even when beaten, so to stop this, the British arrested Gandhiji, but the British were soon forced to release Gandhiji. So here you can see Gandhiji coming out from the jail. So the non-cooperation movement was going on, but in 1922, the people participating in the non-cooperation movement in Chauri Chaura in Uttar Pradesh became violent. So Chauri Chaura is a town near Gorakhpur in Uttar Pradesh. So the movement became violent or aggressive in 1922 in Chauri Chaura. So the people in Chauri Chaura set fire to a police station, and due to this 22 policemen were killed. So because of this, Gandhiji considered this as a failure of the movement and call it off. So because the people became violent, Gandhiji called off the movement. Gandhiji strongly believed that the movement could only succeed if it was non-violent. But because of these people, this movement became violent. So here you can see how these people, they set fire in the police station and 22 policemen were killed in Chauri Chaura in Uttar Pradesh. And Gandhiji considered this as a failure and he believed that the movement could only succeed if it was non-violent. So these people in Chauri Chaura, they became violent and they set fire to a police station and killed 22 policemen. That is why Gandhiji called off this movement and considered it as a failure. And again Gandhiji was arrested by the British and put in prison. And prison means jail. So Gandhiji was again arrested and put in jail by the British. During the non-cooperation movement, many young leaders joined the freedom struggle, and among them were Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad. So now let's see the picture of these young leaders who joined the freedom struggle during the non-cooperation movement. So now let's see. So here you can see he is Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and here he is Subhash Chandra Bose. And then we'll see the picture of Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad. So these were the young Indians who joined the freedom struggle during the non-cooperation movement. So now let's see next, children. So here you can see both the leaders, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and Gandhiji is sitting over here. So now let's see next, children. So this did you know is given in your book. So now let's read it out and understand it. Udham Singh, a revolutionary, shot dead Sir Michael O'Dwyer, believing him to be the main person behind the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. On 13th March 1940 in London, General Dyer, who had actually carried out the massacre, died earlier in 1927. So, Udham Singh, as we have studied in a previous chapter, that he was a revolutionary. So, Michael O'Dwyer was also a British officer. So, Udham Singh thought that Michael O'Dwyer was the main person behind the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. So, he shot dead Sir Michael O'Dwyer in 1940. But General Dyer, who actually carried out the massacre, was already died earlier in 1927. So this what happened in 1940. So now let's see next, children. So this is the next topic, the civil disobedience movement. So in 1922, Gandhiji called off the non-cooperation movement, and in 1930, Gandhiji launched a massive, that means huge or very big, civil disobedience movement. So in 1930, Gandhiji launched a very big civil disobedience movement. Now what was in the civil disobedience movement? So in this movement, Gandhiji called on Indians to refuse to pay taxes, especially the tax on salt, to the British government. So as we know that Indians had to pay taxes, so they even had to pay tax on salt. So Gandhiji called on Indians to refuse to pay taxes and especially the tax on salt. So the British government, they used to take tax on salt also from Indians. The salt law passed by the British prohibited or banned Indians from making salt. So the British passed the salt law in which the Indians were prohibited or banned from making salt. So now Gandhiji decided to start the civil disobedience movement by breaking this unjust law. He organized a peaceful march from Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad to Dandi on the seashore. A large number of people took part in this march. known as the Dandi March. In this Gandhiji march from the Sabarmati Ashram, and where was Sabarmati Ashram? So it was in Ahmedabad. So Gandhiji walked from Sabarmati Ashram to Dandi on the seashore, and Dandi is a village in Gujarat, and a large number of people took part in this march. So this march was known as the Dandi March. So here you can see, so this is from where Gandhiji started. He started from Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad, and he walked from Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad to Dandi, a village in Gujarat. And on the seashore of Dandi, Gandhiji and his followers made salt by evaporating sea water. So evaporating, it is in Hindi we call it bhap. So Gandhiji and his follower, they made salt by evaporating sea water. So now let's see what is evaporation. So water turns into water vapor. Now what is water vapor? So water vapor means water as a gas. So this is how Gandhiji made salt by evaporating sea water. So after breaking salt law, Gandhiji was arrested. So why the British arrested Gandhiji? Because Gandhiji broke the salt law. So that is why the British arrested Gandhiji. But the civil disobedience movement spread throughout India. So here you can see Gandhiji picking up a handful of salt to break the salt law. So that is why the British arrested Gandhiji, because he broke the salt law. So now let's see next, children. So this is the next topic, the Simon Commission and the demand for Purna Swaraj. The British wanted to make some changes in the way India was governed. So now the British wanted to make some changes in the way India was ruled. So in 1928, a committee under Sir Simon called Simon Commission began working on this. There was no Indians in the commission. So because there was no Indians in the commission, so this angered the Indians, and they decided to boycott the commission. And also they staged demonstrations and shouted the slogan, Simon go back. So here you can see how these people, they have written Simon go back. So because there was no Indians in the commission, so that is why they were angry with this commission, and they shouted this slogan, Simon go back. So the Congress now decided to demand Purna Swaraj, or complete independence for India. So let's see next now. So this is our next topic, World War II and the Quit India movement. So now what the British did to stop the movement? The British arrested tens of thousands of people but could not crush the movement. And finally they were forced to introduce reforms. So finally the British were forced to bring improvement, and in 1935 they passed the Government of India Act. So here you can see they passed the Government of India Act in 1935. After this act, elections were held throughout the country, and the Congress won in most provinces. So provinces, we can also call it as areas, or we can say in most regions. So the Congress won the elections in most areas or in most regions, and because the Congress won the elections, so the Congress formed the governments. But power still remained in the hands of the British. So now you understood whether Congress won the elections in most areas, but the power was still in British hands. And in 1939, World War II broke out. The British declared war on India's behalf without talking to the Indian leaders. So the British, without talking to the Indian leaders, they declared war on India's behalf. So in protest of this, the Congress ministries in the area or in the regions resigned. And now the Congress declared that India would not join the war until the British granted complete independence. So for this, they held talks with the British, but the talks failed. So now what the Congress did after the talks failed? So now the Congress under the leadership of Gandhiji launched the Quit India movement in August 1942. This movement was launched, and after the launch of this movement, Gandhiji and other leaders were arrested, and all over the country there were violent protests. So now let's see next. So this is the next topic, Subhash Chandra Bose and the Indian National Army. So Subhash Chandra Bose had been elected president of the Indian National Congress twice. So two times Subhash Chandra Bose elected president of the Indian National Congress, and he was lovingly called Netaji. So Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was convinced that the British would never leave India peacefully. So that's why he went to Japan, and from Japan he organized an army of 40,000 Indian soldiers, and he called it the Azad Hind Fauj or the Indian National Army. So here you can see in this picture, this is the army of 40,000 Indian soldiers, and it is called the Indian National Army or Azad Hind Fauj, formed by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. The Indian National Army fought against the British on the northeast borders of India. So you know children, where is northeast borders of India? About directions we have already studied in chapter 2 maps. So the Indian National Army fought against the British on the northeast borders of India. So at first the Indian National Army pushed back the British, but finally the British defeated the Indian National Army. So here you can see how the British, they defeated the Indian National Army on the northeast borders of India. So now let's see next children. So here you can see this picture. This picture is also given in your book. So let's read out the information related to this picture. So Subhash Chandra Bose with members of the INS. So INA over here is Indian National Army. So this is an old picture of Subhash Chandra Bose. See, here is Subhash Chandra Bose with members of the Indian National Army. So now let's see next children. So this is the next topic, India becomes free. So by the time World War II ended in 1945, the British realized that they could no longer keep the Indians in their control. So in which year World War II started? Yes, it was started in 1939. And when World War II ended? Yes, it ended in 1945. So for how many years World War II was going on? So let's count: 1939, 1940, 1941, 1942, 1943, 1944 and then 1945. So total how many years? So till 6 years World War II was going on. So when World War II ended, British understood that they could no longer keep the Indians in their control. So now they realized this. So the Quit India movement and the Indian National Army had shaken them. So the British agreed to move out of India and started discussions with the Congress and the Muslim League. So when the British started discussion with the Congress and the Muslim League, the British used the divide and rule policy, and they were successful in dividing the Hindus and Muslims. Due to the divide and rule policy of the British, the Muslim League under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah demanded a separate nation for the Muslims. But Gandhiji was against the division of India. On 15th August 1947, India got its independence, but was divided into two nations, India and Pakistan. Gandhiji was heartbroken because his dream of a united India had been broken. So, because of the divide and rule policy of the British, India was divided into two nations, India and Pakistan. Otherwise, we was one nation and we all was known by one name, Indians. So here you can see this is map before and after partition. So here you can see he is Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and the map of India before partition was like this, and Muslim League demanded a separate nation for the Muslims. So here you can see India is divided into two nations, India and Pakistan. So because of this, Gandhiji was heartbroken because his dream of united India was broken. So now let's see next, children. So here this picture is given in your book. So let's read out the information related to this picture. So Jawaharlal Nehru being sworn in as the first Prime Minister of independent India. So Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru being sworn in as the first Prime Minister of independent India. So swan over here in Hindi it means shapat. So Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru being sworn in as the first Prime Minister of independent India. So now let's see next, children. So review time. So it's the time for us to revise what all we have studied. So we have studied the Rowlatt Acts and the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, the non-cooperation movement, the civil disobedience movement, the Simon Commission and the demand for Purna Swaraj. And we have also studied World War II and the Quit India movement, and Subhash Chandra Bose and Indian National Army, how Subhash Chandra Bose formed the Indian National Army, and how Quit India movement and the Indian National Army shaken the British. And we have studied how India becomes free. So this all we have studied today. So now let's see your homework for today. So you have to find out the answers for these questions. India helped the British in World War First, but not in World War II. Why? So this you have to find out. The next question, why Udham Singh, a revolutionary, killed Sir Michael O'Dwyer? So this you have to find out. Then you have to learn and write questions and answers of the chapter. So this is your homework for today. So it's the time for me to leave, children. I hope you have understood the freedom struggle of a country, India. And so now I'll meet you with a new chapter. Till then, take care of yourself and study well.